Alfredo, a tragedy by Beaumont and Fletcher. Dramatis persona. Reinardo is the king of the castle, and Aragon, Alfredo, the prince regent, Teobaldo, the prime minister, Mauricio, a cardinal, Olera, Marcelo, Gonzago. You have Margarita, a daughter to Olera, Amalia, Beatriz, Carlotta, Doratia, and Elena, young gentlewomen of the court, Hypatia, daughter to Marcello, Hecatissa, a noble eastern lady, and other ladies and gentlemen of the court. Scene, Madrid. Act 1, Section 1. Throne room of the palace. The king discovered in full armor on the throne, attended by soldiery. Mauricio, Alfredo, and Teobaldo standing before the throne. Renato says, Alfredo, since it suits our royal pleasure to quit the palace for the noisy camp, grasp shield and spear, and in the clash of war renew the glories of our ancient line. Do thou with law and grace administer the fortunes of our realm. I charge thee tend with constant vigilance the general weal, nor give our people cause for just complaint. Be firm yet kind, nor falter in thy course. Virtue alone thy guide, and Teobaldo, to thee I leave an equal care to guide the young prince in the mysteries of rule. Would the quick mind and check the ardent heart that beats too strongly for the soft and fair. Mauricio, reverend father, thee I beg, that invoke upon our arms thy people's goodwill, with holy water sprinkled over our swords, and strengthened us against the turbaned Moor. Mauricio rises and advances with a silver basin, and besprinkles with holy water the lances of the soldiery. T is on the arms. Mauricio, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, your mission do I bless, and may the cross of righteousness ever triumph on the field. There's a fanfare of trumpets, soldiery form in marching order. Alfredo says, Dear sire, fear nothing for the kingdom's fate. I am not old, but as thou knowest, have drunk deep of the learning of the age and clime. Cordova's volumes are not strange to me, and though my fiery passions rouse thy doubt, I vow them but reflections of thine own, tempered with thoughts of high infinity. Thy deeds in me a ready glow shall wake, as couriers tell wonders thou shalt do. My deepest woe is that my fate denied, I may not march and battle by thy side. Exunt omnes in military order. Scene 2, an antechamber in the palace. Enter Alfredo, preceded by Margarita. Margarita says, Stay good, my lord. Why should I speak with thee when thy words are alien to mine ears? I fain would seek the maidens of the court, who in the garden gathered past the time, with carols innocent and bright withal. Alfredo says, gentle maid, but list into their import. Tells not each one of sempiternal spring, woods, bowers, and pansied pastures lightly trod by the warm swains and yielding nymphs of old, whose storied pleasures need not pass our own. There was a song from outside the window. Hither come and vernal zest, thou with roseate blossoms dressed, seek these lilied bowers, Pan with gracious power presides, Cypern music gently glides through the golden hours. Margarita says, the tune is pretty, though the words escape. Delay me not, for in thy eager voice is that which irks me. I would to the green, and add my carols to the virgin choir. Alfredo says, thou knowest my heart, a royal heart, 'tis true, yet which can find a place for such as thou. Wilt thou not hear? Margarita says, of suppliants I am sick. Thou art too grave to suit my airy will. Get thee into thy chamber, there to lose thyself in tones of antiquated lore. Our stroll upon the porticos at eve, with grave Mauricio, our discourse at length with gloomy Teobaldo, whose cold heart fills thee with coldness like its own. Our go unto the throne room, where in glittering pomp repose the symbols of thy rank and state. Content thyself with sovereignty and art, and leave to sprightlier swains the female heart. Margarita exits. Alfredo solos. How burns my soul for heavens unattained! What paradise in her fair face doth dwell, so fair and yet so cold? Claim me, kind death, if Margarita smile not on my suit. But who comes here? Acatisa enters and says, 'Tis I, my noble prince, admirer of thy learning and thy grace. Nay, flee me not what horror may reside in my poor glance, that thou shouldst shun me so, that I not come from a far eastern shore. Is my proud lineage not as great as thine? Alfredo exits without being noticed. Alas, grim fate, that the young prince should be so warm to other maids, yet so cold to me. Curtain comes across, and then you have Act 2 in a hall in the palace. Alfredo and Hypatia discovered, seated at the table, a large volume betwixt them. Hypatia says, see, prince, the poet falters in this line. It likes me not that he should break the flow of his impassioned numbers. Think not thou he might have writ his glowing thoughts. Alfredo says, 'Tis even as thou sayest, I find my taste ever and ever molded close to thine, as though some strange bewitchment seized my soul, when I with thee con o'er this lettered lore. Yet I do not know myself to be devoid of all that passion which beclouds the mind, and burns not for the thoughtful and the wise. Hypatia says, Yet thou didst call me beauteous on that day, when in the garden we conversed at eve. But hark, methinks I hear a heavy step, as of that ancient prattler Teobaldo, whose very face casts gloom on youthful bliss. I will begone. Hypatia exits, and Teobaldo enters, and says, How now, my studious youth, art deep as ever in the mystic page of Aristotle or Abderon? Methinks I note of late upon thy brow a darkling cloud as of some secret sorrow. Come, tell me all, for age can ever advise. Alfredo says, It is the lady Margarita, sir, who shuns my steps and never will be kind, but smiles and seeks her fellow nymphs without. Her must I have, else in flames shall I die. For sure there is no other hath my heart. Tell, if thou canst, thyself unmoved by love, what refuge from despair I may obtain. Teobaldo says, Alfredo, though my long encrusted heart, cold as the virgin snows of Rhodope, disdains a melting flame, I yet have read much of thy pleasing frenzy in the lore that the warm poets sing for future time. I pity thee, and by our Jesus's blood, I swear to help thee in thy sad amor. This much I know of nymphs, that poets say, they shun the ardent swain, but follow him whose fancy they have caused to think engaged upon another nymph. Therefore seek out some kinder fair, who to thyself inclined will bear thee company in public spots, or Margarita cannot fail to see. But the other day I marked a pensive maid, attentive on thy footsteps, one whose face is by her rank surpassed, yet who could serve a little while to excite a jealous pang. Court then the lady Hecatissa. Alfredo says, Zounds, old man, think dost presume upon our friendship. Thinkest thou I could so ill a nymph endure, even for a moment's casual discourse, she that might move my fair to kinder thoughts? Would my companions rouse to galling jest, but yesternight the young Gonzago smiled, as Hecatissa dodged me like a shadow. Nay, ancient man, back to thy learned lore, I go to find Hypatia. Teobaldo says, Stay, young sir, the name excites my thought. Is it not she, the Duke Marcello's daughter, fair of face, yet fairer still, in godlike mind and soul? Alfredo says, The same with whom in purest friendship linked, I share my studious hours, a wondrous nymph that to Minerva's mind joins Venus's grace. Teobaldo says, Unseen youth, O stripling more than blind, here were a maid well suited to thy life, a wise companion and discerning friend, who like to thee enjoys the bookish moments, when Margarita, being thy wife, would yawn or fret thee with those naggings known to wives, which make celibacy an heavenly boon. Know then that all young nymphs are so alike, save as their mind gives them a varying bent, that it were madness to permit thy rage and amorous frenzy to direct thy choice, banish all thoughts of thy unyielding fair, that cruel nymph whose poor inferior birth unfits her for the throne thy birth must know, and get thee to Hypatia, she whose rank is like her mind, congenial to thine own, and circumstance refuse in early love, dote honor friendship, till from constant sight you both insensibly to love incline. I go, and mayest thou soon to sense return. The wench for God, and to Hypatia burn. Exeunt. Scene 2, the garden. Margarita, Hypatia, Amalia, Beatriz, Carlotta, Doratia, Elena, and Hecatissa discovered at games. Amalia says, What now, dull Margarita, wilt thou quit? These are diversions ere the games have played. Marry, for days I have observed thee thus, with downcast eyes and a funeral look, as though thy father or thy pet cat ailed. Were now the smile that used to deck thy brows, Margarita says. Plague on thee, get thou gone. Must I endure the prattling of thy light, unthinking train? My thoughts are mine, save that I mourn the absence of our good king, our grief upon the fate of the young maiden in yon French romance. Beatriz says, A song vie on the maid who could today, and melancholy waste the sweets of morn. See how the sun shines. Come, Carlotta, sing that Chanson taught thee by the troubadour, whilst Dorothea makes the supportive lute. Carlotta sings, accompanied by Dorothea. The lilies lay white on the mead, when Colin his Lycia dressed. In vain did the young shepherd plead, for coyness had frozen her breast. But Phoebus shone hot from above, and Cupid filled all the warm air. So Colin exchanged his love, found Doris more pleasing and fair. Margarita says, Cease your rude noise, the lute is out of tune. Dorothea says, No more than are thy thoughts, ungrateful nymph. Carlota says, I swear the music well did fit my song. Margarita says, because thy croaking likewise was array. Hypatia says, ladies, for shame, what discord can be yours? Margarita says, behold the poetess who bore us worse, with wretched pilfered sonnets of her own. Say, learned maid, how many frigid reams of dullness hast thou plagiarized today? Hecatisia says, I saw her lately at a mighty book. Were we to look well, we should find therein much of her late-sung songs, I doubt me not. Hypatia says, crying, wherefore these taunts, ungentle and untrue? Have I by some mischief conferred offence? Or any damsel here? If so, my heart grants that repentance that my tongue would tell, did it but know wherein the offence might lie. Helena says, nay, sweet Hypatia, if offence there be, thine is the last tongue that could bear the blame. But stay, the Prince Alfredo comes. Alfredo enters with the book. The maidens flock about him. Alfredo says, I greet you all, no lovelier train ever danced over velvet turf, mid the vernal flowers, since Cytherea, fresh from Paphos, led her melting followers o'er Arcadian meads. Margarita says, good morrow, Prince. How does my lord today? Amalia says, standing off to the side, our Margarita learns a brighter tone. Alfredo says, well, well, good nymph, to Margarita, and then to Hypatia says, and art thou yet prepared to scan our daily lesson o'er and read the lines thou settest were nearly writ? Methinks yon verdurous bower well suits the student mind. Let's to its shade, and by no bleak walls confined. Exeunt Alfredo and Hypatia, attended by all save Margarita and Hecatisa. Hecatisa says, sister, our prince seems humorous today. Hypatia likes him well, or else his books have much subdued the raging of his heart. Margarita says, have none of this. Some evil influence works in all thy vain and dark imaginings fill my long sleepless nights. Hecatisia says, 'tis so with me. For young Alfredo's scorn I illy bear. There is a custom in the fervid East, from whence I come, whereby an injured maid sometimes doth ease her pride with odd revenge. I'd speak with thee alone, good Margarita, sister in suffering, joined to me in hate. Haply the swain, my own Hypatia's power, but many a day precedes the nuptial hour. Act 3, Scene 1, in an antechamber. Alfredo, Hypatia, Teobaldo, Marcello, Olera, Mauricio, Margarita, and Hecatisa enter. Mauricio says, are now the rites prepared? This day I own the greatest joy of an eventful life, to join in holiest wedlock of the church my Prince Alfredo and the fair Hypatia. Is true your royal parents quit the fray for a brief space to witness these rejoicings? Alfredo says, he hath advised me so, your eminence, in letters sent by Duke Marcello here, who being father to the maid I wed, was chosen to precede him, and to plan the mask we do enact to glad the day. Mauricio says, what of the mask? I know that Teobaldo, delving in antique lore, hath writ a play of heathen gods and naiads, but no more. He told me, since he gave the acting over to younger hands, his own share being done. Teobaldo says, Dost not remember, Reverend Mauricio, it was a pastoral fancy, a light thing about young Glaucus and the nymphs, wherein Alfredo hath a leading part to play, whilst round him several maids do act, chief among these Hypatia, dressed as Scylla. The purport of the myth I have improved just far enough to make a happy end, so that the pair, given a proper potion, take the mortal form again, and dwell on earth. At this part of the pageant must your eminence, ready with book and ring, the mask conclude by joining the young twain in genuine bonds. Maurice says, a pretty notion, one that likes me well, and fear not, but I shall play my part. Alfredo says, look you upon my daughter, mark how fair she is bedight as Circe. I shall act the great green Oceanus. Marcel says, look on my child, the image of my sainted Ines, when upon mine arm to similar rite she went. Would that she might have lived to see this hour. Alfredo says, the hour, my duke, is not yet over. Mauricio says, dost fear some trifle like to go amiss? How now? Alfredo says, nay, eminence, I think all well. All will go well, most well. Marcel says, come now, the time is growing short, ready to use when that play demands. Hakatisa says, my lord, I have, even as I agreed, my face, unequal to the mask, hath not withheld from me a lesser useful part. The wine is of old vintage, old and rare. No man or woman here hath drunk such wine. 'Tis from the east, whence, as you know, I come. Hot boys play without the door. Alfredo says, it is the king, my noble sire. Minarto, let us go to the hall and greet him as he comes. Margarita steps aside, saying, welcome, great king. Watch close the moving play, for great events are like to hap this day. Exeunt. Scene 2 is in a great hall. Curtains drawn before a stage. Minarto, Teobaldo, ladies, gentlemen, and soldiers are seated as expected. Minarto says, how goes it now, must learn Teobaldo. Will the last act suffice to break the spell? Teobaldo says, so have I written it, my lord. As now thou seest the ill of Circe's wrath, thou shalt hereafter view the sweet Endymion played by young Gonzago, a noble Castro's son. Bring from the moon a draught of magic nectar, which drunk restores the enchanted pair to earth. Minarto says, it likes me well. I thank thee for the pains thou hast extended on the revelry. Alfredo bears him well. Teobaldo says, but lo, my lord, the curtains part again. Attend the scene. The curtains reveal a scene representing rocks and seashore. Enter Gonzago, dressed as Endymion, bearing a goblet. He blows on a conch shell. Gonzago says, spirits from your oozy deeps, where the sea god lightly sleeps, watery nymphs that ride the waves, naiads from your ocean caves, rise above your native foam, where the docile dolphins roam. Rise, ye lovely mermaid throngs, pensive with fair Scylla's wrongs. Kind Leucothea, friend of man, come the joyful rites to scan. Enter many young maids dressed as sea goddesses, together with Margarita, dressed as Circe. Margarita, begone, intruder from the skies, and from fair Latmus, flowering meads. For you, no potent sea gods rise, nor yours to meddle with my deeds. Gonzago says, Circe, thou foul, debasing power hath fled, as Dion shining over thy sinful head. Exert superior sway within my hand, a magic draught I bear, thy noxious ills forever to repair, and wash thy charms away. Glaucus and Scylla from your depths appear, and Endymion calls, deliverance is here, by Cynthia's mercy wrought. Alfredo and Hypatia enters. as Glaucus and Scylla, Gonzago and Damian extends them a goblet. Drink deep of this the golden moon hath sent, and know at last an unalloyed content to human likeness brought. He gives the cup to Alfredo, who permits Hypatia to drink, and then drinks himself. Alfredo says, as light as the billows that bound on the foam, beats my heart as I turn to my own native home. Fair Scylla, my bride, ere the nightfall shall be, and will linger no more by the rocks and the sea. Reels a trifle, but steadies himself. Hypatia tremendously says, Cynthia, unspotted maid, that sendest thy blessed aid, thy altars rich. Falls in Alfredo's arms. I faint, Alfredo. What is this strange fire that courses madly through each aching vein? Alfredo says, Hypatia, love, what hath the furies wrought? A venom anguish burns my very soul. Father, my royal sire, thou, Teobaldo, attend us in this sudden new distress. Alfredo and Hypatia sink to the floor. Renato and Teobaldo approach them. Renato takes Alfredo in his arms, and then there's the entrance of Hecatisa and Olero from behind the scenes. Renato says, My son Alfredo, speak to me, my child. Hecatisia says, How now is Eastern wine a shade too strong for obdurate princes and designing maids? Gonzago draws his sword and says, Exotic fiend, thine was the guilty hand, but 'twill no second act of mischief do. Kills her. Olero draws a sword from beneath his masked costume and gives battle to Gonzago. Olero says, This for my daughter, slighted by the prince, thou servest with such unreasoning devotion, and inflicts a mortal wound. Gonzago says, I die, most noble king, and then he dies. Teobaldo draws and engageth Olero. Teobaldo says, Thou damned churl, accept the fate that is too good for thee, being worthy only of the hangman's noose, and mortally wounds Olero. Margarita steals up behind Teobaldo. Olero says, Daughter, avenge me, and then he dies. Margarita stabs Teobaldo in the back. Margarita says, Ancient wretch, take this, for my poor father and for me, whose woes came from thy knavish counsel, to Alfredo. Alfredo, dying, crawls out from his father's arms and grasps the sword of the dead Gonzago and approaches Margarita from behind. Teobaldo says, Pox on the wench. Renato, my time's here, yet would I have thee know, I die right gladly in service of my king. Alfredo stabs Margarito. Alfredo says, This cursed nymph, for Teobaldo and for all the grief that my caprice and vanity hath wrought. Foul murderess. Margarita says, I perish by thy hand. Beloved Alfredo, loving thee the more, 'tis a sweet death. I should have killed myself thereafter, being loath to live without thee, but I could not permit thee. Wed Hypatia, and then dies. Teobaldo to Alfredo, Kind youth, I am avenged. We go together to regions of infinity and light. Alfredo and Teobaldo die. Enter Marcello from behind the scenes of Mask. Marcel says, What means this sight of horror, child? Hypatia, they say that thou art poisoned. Tell me, child. And he goes to his daughter. Hypatia says, Father, I die, but die not unavenged. For those that plotted this fell thing are slain. It is as well, for I have ever thought that death itself is but a kind of marriage, and that I shall in realms of ether rove with my Alfredo, tasting loftier joys than we on earth might ever have possessed. See yon gold goblet, wherefrom we did drink, the fateful draught which us in death does link, and then dies. Renato says, Our beloved children both are slain. Marcello, I have my kingdom, but of what avail were 20 kingdoms to a soul bereaved? Marcello picks up the goblet and drinks therefrom. Marcel says, My liege, I go, I am too old to live. An empty frame whereof the heart is dead. Marcello, who shall say a father's grief is greater in a duke than in a king? Give me the goblet, Marcel weakly says. Nay, my lord Renato, the state requires the guidance of thy hand. 'Tis thine to live, Renato says. No more, give me the vessel. It is thy king that bids. Mauricio here, an honored cardinal of the Holy Church, will rule by the Pope's edict till my brother comes back from Sicily to take the throne. He takes his goblet and drinks. 'Tis done. I took a heavier draught than thine, that I might die the sooner, and with thee. We have been friends, Marcello, in the midst of roaring battle and unmeasured power. Here, take my hand. Marcel says, I think it is the end. Bernardo says, it is indeed the end. To Maurizio, godly Mauricio, say over our several bodies those grave rites, couched in Latin, which thy church prescribes. For them that die, and to succeeding times impart a knowledge of these dire events, drawing such morals as thy cloth deviseth. I come, Alfredo, nearest to my heart, whom death from me could but a moment part. Renato and Marcello die. Mauricio says, see to what ills doth female malice tend. Our king Renato, his proud son, the fair Hypatia, and the learned Teobaldo. Marcello, noble duke, the young Gonzago, all slain, though to avenge them lifeless lie. The damned Margarita and her sire, treacherous Olero, and the eastern dame, whose crimes and hideousness outrank her aspect. Ye grave assembled guests, I pray you all for a brief time depart, till funeral rites be substituted for yon nuptial settings. My heart cries out against thee overwhelming deeds. I'll to the chapel and count o'er my beads. And thus ends the tragedy. And fiction, particularly that which people enact amongst themselves, can pass on myths that aren't socially appropriate, are expedient to express as if they're literally true. It was in general good advice to say, well, hear your interest, consider that in regards to the woman. But of course, one of the things that a person shouldn't do, you don't have to be like totally the same. That doesn't always work the best. And there's that nominal thing. Is the religion of the land and all this stuff just some nominal thing? It's like, it's your rights, it's this, it's like, why isn't it one's own? Or is that just a vicarious reliance, which denies them the experience of what would be called a saint?